It's early 1993 and NASA are drawing up plans to launch an unmanned Koenigsegg 1620 rocket into low Earth orbit. The designers have decided to plaster across the fuselage a large logo for an upcoming Hollywood movie due to be released that summer. The surname of the film's top star is to be spelled out on the booster, although they're having difficulty fitting the actor's 14-letter last name onto the rocket. The movie is Last Action Hero, and its star is Arnold Schwarzenegger. You see, Last Action Hero was a movie so overhyped, so grandiosely promoted pre-release, that it was inevitably set to fail. Due to a myriad of production issues, from the multiple rewrites of its screenplay to an exhaustingly rushed shooting schedule, Columbia Pictures' 1993 summer blockbuster was not just one of the biggest flops of the decade, but it marked the beginning of the end of audiences' appetite for Schwarzenegger.
Piece of cake. Hey, you want to be a farmer? Here's a couple of acres.
Unsuccessful at the box office and unpopular with critics upon release, the film has gained a minor following over time, full of references to other movies and nods to common Hollywood cliches, such as, say, the need to never reload guns or the ubiquity of attractive young people living in LA. The film unwittingly ended up becoming the very thing it was satirising. But there are moments here. Moments that predate those that would later become central to the self-reflexive postmodern boom that was to shake Hollywood in the mid-1990s. And there's one moment, a moment of filmmaking so delicate and brilliant where the film intelligently shows us its satirical sleight of hand. It's either so perfectly executed it's genius, or so coincidentally goofed that it's a miracle. A movie set within a movie, Last Action Hero is a fantasy action comedy satire directed by John McTiernan from a screenplay initially written by Zach Penn and Adam Leff. In the film, Danny Madigan is a 12-year-old boy living in New York City who is obsessed with action movies, particularly the in-universe Jack Slater series starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. After receiving an enigmatic magical ticket from the owner of the old cinema that he frequents, he is transported from the relative safety of his seat into the screen.
Who the hell are you?
Don't shoot me. I'm Danny Madigan. I'm a kid.
It's from here on we see the fantasy of a young boy play out and the cultural commentary begin. Gags throughout gesture at the glorification of violence in cinema. They take aim at fictional portrayals of the LAPD and parody the on-screen invincibility of action movie stars. You see, before Hollywood was producing films firmly planted within the realm of postmodernism, such as later 90s productions like Scream, Pulp Fiction, Being John Malkovich, to newer movies like Deadpool, Adaptation and Cabin in the Woods, we had this.
Quick, where are the Schwarzenegger films?
Foreign films are in the back.
No, action. This guy's an action star.
Down the center on the left.
No, it isn't possible.
What's not possible? He's fantastic. This is his best performance ever.
But that was you. You were in that movie.
1993 was the start of a shift in attitudes towards on-screen violence. PG-13s meant larger audiences and bigger business. The days of the big-budget R-rated action movie were coming to an end. 1991's Terminator 2, seen here in this great scene with Danny trying to convince Slater that he's living inside of a movie, is widely considered to be one of the best action movies ever made, and it neatly caps off a generation of violent R-rated big-budget Hollywood action blockbusters that we were used to seeing throughout the late 70s and 80s. This was a generation that had its roots in movies such as Bullet, Dirty Harry, Enter the Dragon, Death Wish, and Shaft, which then grew in popularity and by the late 1980s had firmly established a distinct personality no better exemplified than in classics like The Terminator, First Blood, Die Hard, RoboCop, and Kickboxer. We see the rise of mainstream action movies mirror concurrent attitudes in the US with the emergence of Reagan-era conservative values, our heroes tending to exude a more old-fashioned, no-nonsense, shoot first and ask questions later approach. But we're now in 1993 and action movies are having an identity issue. Parodies such as Loaded Weapon 1 and Hot Shots are already pointing to the now tired tropes and cliches, and The Simpsons have just introduced their McBain Rainier Wolfcastle character.
Nice to see you.
McBain!
The cardboard prop in the movie store that portrays Sylvester Stallone instead of Arnie works not just as a great visual joke, but also acts as a symbolic tombstone to a bygone era of the R-rated megaplex action romp. Pop culture, and Hollywood cinema specifically, has, over the last 30 years, developed a distinct obsession with itself, its history, and its own technology. No other medium features or references its own media as much as the average Hollywood movie does. From film sets within films, to videotapes and television screens acting as gateways to the other side. But we'll go down this rabbit hole at a later date in another video. Back to Terminator 2. You see, it's not just the T-100 here that's having trouble with his identity. It's the action movie genre as a whole in 1993. As light-hearted as this scene and many others are in the film, there's another that truly shows us how clever and discerning the film really is, or at least was in its initial production stages. This scene in question totally changes how you see Last Action Hero and how you watch it. So here we go.
Trust me. If that little turd, Daniel Madigan, can move through parallel worlds, I can move through parallel worlds. In and out. In, steal whatever I want, and out again. Impossible to catch. If God was a villain, he'd be me.
Did you see it? No? Okay, let's watch again.
If that little turd, Daniel Madigan, can move through parallel worlds, I can move through parallel worlds. In and out. In, steal whatever I want.
Okay, stop right there. This is the moment Hollywood transcends the boundaries of parody and is forcibly moved into the orbits of self-awareness, meta-narratives, and a grand obsession with its own past identity. At this moment, we catch a fleeting glimpse of the camera crew in the mirror behind Benedict. This takes him beyond the proscenium. He jumps right off the stage and into the audience, into our world. In Movie World LA, Charles Dance's character, the antagonist Benedict, has come to the realization that through acquiring Danny's magical ticket, that he's living inside of a fictional movie world. After killing his criminal boss, he turns to the camera and addresses us, the audience, directly. The first time any character in the movie has done so, completely destroying any walls between ourselves and him, raising any suspension of disbelief we ever held. And it is here something genius happens. His eyes finally opened, his perception finally clear and cleansed. He can fully see the reality that his existence is completely fabricated. He can now see the camera crew shooting the movie that we, the audience, are watching. Looking through the palm trees and sun of Los Angeles and gazing right at us, the viewer, seeing our aspirations and our desires, our nightmares and our fantasies, visions of a weird new world on the reverse side of a screen. This acts as a wormhole from Danny's grey New York City to Slater's Technicolor LA, a reminder of the stark contrast between our terrestrial palette of beiges, browns and greys and the vivid colour of Hollywood and the vibrancy of celluloid. This new insight acquired by Benedict is his escaping Plato's cave moment, and understanding that entities in his world are creations from a truer, more real world. A world where characters are not just mere two-dimensional shadows of real, three-dimensional actors. This scene mirrors Neo's awakening from his perceived reality in the film The Matrix, itself also being visually articulated and experienced by the character through a mirror. With the then rising use of the internet and the creation of online alter egos in a growing digital sphere, portrayals of simulated realities rode a small wave of popularity in the late 90s, birthing an almost mini-genre. Alongside The Matrix, movies such as The Truman Show, The 13th Floor, Existenz, Open Your Eyes, and Dark City form a trend-defining hexaptic, a trend that was seemingly started half a decade earlier by Last Action Hero.
There was nothing to it.
The crux of the movie, and its playing with false realities and simulacrum theories, is beautifully exemplified in one scene where Slater, whom at this point in the film has also left Plato's cave and crossed over into the real world, is confronted with the truth in a dizzying Spielberg-esque moment, seeing for the first time the actor Arnold Schwarzenegger portraying the shadow Jack Slater on a movie billboard. Arnold Schwarzenegger is Jack Slater.
What is this place? Where am I now? Danny, you got a place I can sit down?
It's no coincidence that when Danny takes Slater back home, we see that Danny lives at apartment 3D, a nod to Slater fully leaving his on-screen 2D identity and transitioning into a real, full 3D human being. Danny's mum even mistaking him for the real actor Arnold Schwarzenegger. But going back to Benedict and his newfound awareness, we have to question as viewers whom are aware of the fact that we're watching a staged performance. Was this peek behind the curtain intentional, or just a perfectly timed coincidence? A goof committed on set and left in the editing stage, maybe? To be quite honest, I don't really think it matters, as it doesn't really shift the fundamental concept of what is being presented here. What it does allow us to do is for us to understand the movie as playing a far more intellectual game than we initially gave it credit for. Our own perception, much like Benedict's, is opened and expanded. The goalposts shifted as we are now willing to search deeper into the material. We can now look a lot closer and read this film in a new, more complex way. The stabilizers are now off. If we watch the film this way, like a new way of seeing, we see a much darker, more critical subtext behind the mask of the film's bright, garish, sun-soaked LA. But in order to see the film like this, let's briefly look at its troubled production history. In the early 90s, Columbia were desperate for a new hit franchise similar to those that Warner Bros. Had scored with the likes of Batman and Lethal Weapon. Last Action Hero was set to become Columbia's next big event picture. Their last hugely profitable IP had been Ghostbusters almost a decade prior. With dreams of video games, action figures and fast food tie-ins, Columbia picked up a screenplay by young writers Zach Penn and Adam Leff titled Extremely Violent, which not just parodied established action movie cliches, but surveyed the genre from a deeply satirical stance with a focus on the mindless violence and impractical destruction normally shown by an overtly masculine hero. And this was all wrapped in a similar comedic style to that of The Simpsons. Columbia liked the script and hired, ironically, Shane Black, who was famous for his action movie screenplays like Lethal Weapon and The Last Boy Scout, to do a rewrite. After Schwarzenegger jumped on board as the film's producer and lead actor, he personally brought in William Goldman to also work on the script. John McTiernan, who had just come off a super successful streak with Predator, Die Hard, and The Hunt for Red October, signed on as director. The script then would be briefly overseen by Steve Roth, Larry Ferguson, and Carrie Fisher. These moves would prove counterproductive though, as with such a set of action movie pros working on the film, many original elements such as its nuanced critique and deeper cultural commentary gradually grinded away, resulting in a screenplay wildly different from what was originally spec'd. This many cooks is surely going to spoil the broth. The foundations of the production were already shaky under a rushed and tense shooting schedule in New York and LA. This was then followed by a disastrous test screening on May 1st, which gave the team just 6 weeks to completely recut the entire movie and complete almost all post-production duties, all with no time allowed for reshoots. The summer of 1993 also saw the release of Steven Spielberg's mega hit Jurassic Park, which immediately flew to number 1 at the box office and would go on to become the highest grossing movie of all time. Unfortunately, Last Action Hero would open just 1 week later, Columbia adamant throughout its production about sticking to a June 18th release date, despite both Arnie and McTiernan's efforts to reschedule. The film released to much critical deride and a weak $50 million domestic box office, way under its $85 million production budget. An opening sandwiched between Jurassic Park and Sleepless in Seattle, which came out just 1 week later, had proved financially disastrous. The critics weren't being much nicer either. Upon release, it was called overblown and poorly executed, a confused, chaotic mess, and that it plays more like a bright idea than a movie that was thoroughly thought through.
Sure, what can I do for you?
Well,
And this is correct, there are tons of bright ideas here, ideas that faintly resemble those initially scripted by Penn and Leff. They're just buried under so much needless, inconsequential guff. A great example would be an early scene in the movie where Danny gets burgled. It has no long-term effect on the story being told, it is totally out of sync with the rest of the film's tone, and only serves to bloat the film's 2-hour and 10-minute long running time. Also, why does Death retain his powers in the real world yet Slater doesn't? It's holes and inconsistencies like these that stop us from truly committing to a prolonged, sincere story arc or committing to any character development. We could easily sit back and pick apart the rules and metaphysics of Slater's universe. Like, for example, if Slater is the star of Jack Slater 4, which, unbeknown to him, we are watching, and if Catherine Tramwell is the star of her own movie, being Basic Instinct, then what film is the T-1000 a star of? Because it certainly isn't Terminator 2, as we see that that movie already exists as a movie within that movie world. I feel the movie was never really meant to be critically probed like this, because upon deconstruction, it immediately falls apart. We should instead experience a piece of meta-driven media like this in a similar way to how we process something like, say, The Simpsons. And like The Simpsons, there's a lot of good stuff here. From fine details like the Lethal Weapon-esque sax riff during the 2 days to retirement line.
2 days to retirement.
The neon lights and latex in the police station. Slater's horrendous driving. Benedict's goon who can't seem to catch anything. And the film's presentation of a clean, high-fidelity, fictional LA.
Look, the point is, there are no unattractive women here. I mean, where are the ordinary, everyday women? They don't exist because this is a movie.
No, this is California.
This idealized vision of California is perfectly opposed to Danny's real-world New York, where it's dark, it's wet, and it's visually busy. When we jump over from the movie world into the real world, we're thrown back into grim reality. Slater is no longer invincible in this version of New York City. This New York is reminiscent of how the city had previously been framed in movies like The Warriors, Taxi Driver, Midnight Cowboy, and Jacob's Ladder. Manhattan here is dirty, depressing, and depraved.
Nah, yo, get the shoes. Take your shoes, man. Come on, we ain't got time. Come on.
Danny's world is a far cry from that of Slater's. But again, if we use the same eye that we used earlier for the crew in the mirror Plato's cave moment, if we use this way of seeing again, we see that not only is something wrong with the city, but something is especially wrong with Danny. Danny Madigan is a 12-year-old working-class boy living with his single mother in downtown New York, where he regularly skips school to frequent an old, run-down, decrepit cinema in the heart of Times Square, run by Nick. Danny is surrounded by violence, evidenced by the movies he adores to the cartoons that he watches. It's on the streets of downtown Manhattan and visibly apparent by the cuts on his knuckles, possibly highlighting that he's been fighting. He can't even read Hamlet without picturing it being accompanied by a high body count.
Hey, Claudius. You killed my father. Big mistake.
There's a brilliant shot early on in the film where Danny leaves Nick's cinema at the western end of 42nd Street, just off Times Square. As Danny walks down the street, a closer observation shows that the cinema marquees advertise movies with horrifically violent titles. Sex, Blood, Murder in Times Square, I Want Your Blood, Head Crusher, and Your Blood or Mine are just a few that are shown. Times Square here is presented as a broken down relic of the past, cynical, hard and seedy. Downbeat urban squalor and all its associated characters and vices occupy Danny's Manhattan. But this New York isn't the New York of 1993 that we know. You see, by 1993 the first steps towards the Disneyfication of Times Square had already been taken. The Times Square that we know today, and more broadly, the larger gentrification of Manhattan, was already well underway. 42nd Street had fallen into decay since the Great Depression. The once prestigious theatres had, by the 1950s and 60s, been converted into grindhouses and porno theatres. This area had become blighted, hostile and dangerous. The book Sleazoid Express describes the unique blend of people that made up theatregoers of this era. Depressives hiding from jobs, sexual obsessives, inner city people seeking cheap diversions, teenagers skipping school, adventurous couples on dates, couples chasers peeking on them, people getting high, homeless people sleeping, pickpockets, phony drug salesmen, low-level drug dealers, chain snatchers, junkies alone in the heroin and cocaine dream world, predatory chicken hawks spying on underage trade looking for pickups, male prostitutes of all ages, transsexuals, hustlers and closeted gays with fetishistic, homo or heterosexual itch to scratch. 42nd Street was, by the 80s, synonymous with sex, drugs and the underworld. But by 1990, change was happening under Mayor David Dinkins. The city was cleaning up 42nd Street, and this started in 1990 with the formation of New 42nd Street, a non-profit organisation created to oversee the renovation and reuse of many of the old porno theatres. Six cinemas were shut down or taken over by the government, and more closed. By the time shooting had begun for Last Action Hero, Times Square was in the middle of its transformation, and 42nd Street was almost entirely closed by 1992. The entirety of 42nd Street was shut for almost a week during filming, and these amazing photos by Brian Camp show the incredible set dressing undertaken for the shoot. The Empire Theatre, which is the location of Nick's cinema in the film, is one of the few remaining theatres from that era still standing today. The 42nd Street that we see in the movie is New York City transported back to a very recent past. An idea of a city, a suburban rendition of downtown. So why is Danny's New York so different from the one that was actually happening at the time? There's a theory out there online that imagines Danny is actually a victim of a predatory paedophile Nick. His only escape from the abuse is by imagining that he is part of a Jack Slater movie. The movie world parts of the film made up in his head as a coping mechanism. I personally don't really buy into this theory. I mean, Nick seems like an okay guy, he's just a bit corny and has some really bad dialogue. But if we take elements of this theory and use the way of seeing that we had used earlier to help us see into and beyond Benedict's mirror, we see something very dark start to emerge in Danny's psyche. What if Danny is imagining all of this? What if Danny didn't really get sucked into a Jack Slater movie? What if Danny is actually psychotic?
Don't talk, just do it!
Okay, so it's just an idea, so roll with me on a few of the punches here, okay? What if through Danny's overexposure to violence, a social system that seems to be failing both him and his mother, and a lack of a father figure, Danny has become an angry young boy whose dislike of the world and its people have manifested into a deeply disturbed mind. The apparent real world that he inhabits isn't actually that real at all. As we know, New York was in the early stages of urban regeneration by 1993. Certainly not the New York that Danny sees. Also, none of these movie titles actually exist, and we know that Danny's world shares the same catalogue of cinema as our own through his knowledge of Terminator 2 and Amadeus, plus the later movie premiere scene featuring real-life movie stars as themselves. This real world has all the foundations of our world, but is littered with Danny's own mentally unstable projections. Danny's warped vision of the world has come to manically reflect his own faults. None of these marquee titles are real, they're just Danny's thoughts leaking from a corrupted mind. This is how he sees the world.
Cereal bugs. I can't wait to see the new...
We noted earlier about how nonsensical the apartment burglary scene is, how from the break-in all the way to the police report, it all seems to happen in less than 20 minutes. The tone is way more aggressive than the rest of the film, and the scene has no real major long-term implications on the grander narrative. Well, maybe this is all because it never actually happened. Maybe Danny imagined the whole entire thing, and the scene is just setting a precedent for the revelation that is about to come. The revelation that Danny imagined the entire Jack Slater movie world escapade. He was never actually sucked into the movie. He just imagined the whole experience. Danny, of course, doesn't actually see himself as an outwardly violent or psychotic person. He sees himself as just a byproduct of a sadistic, morally corrupt world, and he wants to use his internalized violence as a force for good. He imagines himself growing up to use this aggression in the same manner as Jack Slater does. But in actual fact, he's way more likely to grow up and become the burglar, using violence as a downbeat means to an end whilst blaming the influence of a broken society around him. An unjust society that took his father's life, asked too much from his mother, leading her to not be there for him. And if the prior theory is to be believed, allowing him to be exploited by an old, pervy cinema owner. Danny has grandiose dreams of being this, but in actual fact, he's this.
What is it with you? You got junk! No jewelry, no VCR, a shit TV that'll get me $20. Go fishing, we go.
A dream of what he is to become, a nightmare vision of his own future. On closer analysis of Danny's ego and mind, we see dissimilarities between himself and other young male protagonists in similar fantastical situations around the same time. Like Marty McFly from the Back to the Future series, Kevin from Home Alone, Charlie Brewster in Fright Night, or even Judy and Peter Shepard in Jumanji. A big difference is that these characters, as were many young leads in the 90s, were extremely middle class and inhabited a very specific, safe, successful, white, affluent, middle America. Danny's existence, on the other hand, mirrors that of John Connor from Terminator 2, or Arnold from Hey Arnold, with a streak of Michael Douglas's portrayal of William Foster in the earlier 1993 film Falling Down. Foster's own mental state is metaphorically reflected in LA's heat, whilst Danny's in New York's rain. Danny's Jack Slater fantasies of guns, explosions and death are strongly reminiscent of the delusions and actions played out by older urban outcasts like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, or more interestingly, like Joaquin Phoenix's take on the Joker in the 2019 film. Both live in crime-ridden, depressing American cities, Joker's Gotham basically being a clone of 1980s New York. Even the colours of Danny's world mimic those of the Joker's. Both occupy worlds where initially they seem to be innocent victims of a cruel society, when in actual fact, it's wider regular society that has become the victim of a small elite few. Both carry strong working class identities whilst living alone with their single mothers, and both lack prominent father figures in their lives. Danny fills his patriarchal void in his life with his idolisation of Arnold Schwarzenegger and his heroic movie roles, whilst Arthur Fleck looks to Robert De Niro's charismatic talk show host character Murray. Both imagine themselves being sucked into the screen, being transplanted into the action, and being part of the drama, part of the story alongside their respective idols. For a brief moment of escape from their dreary existence, they see themselves as saviours of an imagined narrative in an imagined world. Last Action Hero is a warning of what inconsequential violence and the heroic lone wolf embrace of that violence can do to a young mind. At the heart of the movie is not a demand for censorship or regulation, but a message about an awareness of context and self-reflexiveness. What it's saying, much like The Simpsons, is that criticism can be fun. Penn and Left didn't write a screenplay that critiqued action movies because they hate action movies. They wrote Last Action Hero because they love action movies and they want them to be even better. Be critical of the media you love. It's the only way it'll ever get better.
This is a movie set. This is a movie set. That's how the scenery changed, right?
So this is just an idea, a method of viewing the movie in a different light, and it shows us the power of entertaining far-flung theories that counter some more grounded concepts. It's a form of viewing not too dissimilar from critique, both offering great ways to keep the conversation going way after the credits have stopped rolling. The ending of Last Action Hero is predictably cheesy, but in all the right ways. Danny eventually helps Slater back into the movie world, closing with Slater giving us, the audience, a knowing wink, now aware of the camera crew in his reality before driving off into the sunset. Last Action Hero wasn't just a parody of action movies. It was a critical take on the tired studio formula and the behind-the-scenes politics of 1990s Hollywood. It was critical of the glorification of violence in cinema at the time and the brazen marketing of R-rated movies to kids. I myself remember growing up playing with Alien, Robocop, Gremlins and Terminator toys that were aimed directly at children, even though all of these franchises were either R-rated in the States or rated 15 and 18 by the BBFC here in the UK. The movie is a time capsule from 1993, when Blockbuster Video, Minidiscs and MC Hammer were not just a thing, but they were the future. They say good satire shouldn't just point at things, but actually comment on the things that it's pointing at. Otherwise, you end up coming dangerously close to becoming the very thing that you're meant to be satirising, only with a smug, self-congratulatory smirk. But Last Action Hero is too charming to fall into this category. That same place occupied by the likes of, say, Family Guy, or the directing duo of Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer. But then the film doesn't really go far enough, like the original script had intended, to scrape the levels of commentary and subtext that The Simpsons or The Purple Rose of Cairo had previously achieved. Maybe it was just a bit too ahead of its time. Big budget Hollywood wasn't ready to see itself reflected and parodied just yet, especially coming from one of their own. These days, meta-narratives are everywhere, and almost all good media seems to have some level of self-awareness in regards to its own postmodern existence. Some great newer films that possess this sense of comedic reflexiveness include 22 Jump Street, the Lego Batman movie, Thor Ragnarok, Wreck-It Ralph, The Disaster Artist, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. If the film were to be remade today alongside movies like these, with someone like, say, Dwayne Johnson taking over the role of Jack Slater and Phil Lord and Christopher Miller taking writing and directing duties, the film would possibly fare a little better with a whole new generation of fresh action flicks to pick apart.
Jeez, how'd you know there was a guy in there?
There's always a guy in there.
In the end, the Conestoga 1620 rocket never actually left Earth. The launch delayed again and again until the June 1993 release date came and went. Much like this movie, it quickly faded from public consciousness. A 40-foot inflatable Jack Slater was created to float around New York, brandishing a shotgun in one hand and a stick of dynamite in the other. Quite disingenuous considering the film's original script by Penn and Leff was meant to tackle issues around violence. Due to the World Trade Center bombing in February that year, the dynamite was replaced by a police badge, but the shotgun remained, and this kind of gave off even more mixed signals. The film seemed to be forever plagued by disappointments. So next time your laptop or phone runs out of battery, or you turn off the television, confronted by an ominous, dark, black mirror and your own reflection staring back at you, look a little closer and see if you can observe the clues of a reality far beyond your own. So this was my first YouTube video in this format, so feel free to comment and leave any feedback. I would be interested in producing more content in this style depending on how this one is received. A full list of references and citations is available in the description below. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at 11Yearz, which is spelled 11YRZ, or visit my website chrismichael.xyz for more information. Thank you for watching and see you soon.